It is the first mega sport. If we take someone like Gaius Diocles, who was a charioteer, he makes about 24 million sesterces during a 24-year career. So that would make him, we don't know exactly how much of it he kept. He survived, he wasn't killed. I looked up, Michael Jordan is the richest sportsman alive today, who, mainly because of his sportswear and stuff that he now has, he's worth something like $3.75 billion. If Diocles was alive today, and allowing for it being quite difficult to translate between sesterces and dollars, but roughly it would be worth about $15 billion.
Hello, another bonus episode for you as I chat games and gladiators in ancient Rome with Justin Pollard, historical consultant on the new TV show Those About to Die, which stars Anthony Hopkins. Sadly, Mr. Hopkins had scheduling conflicts, so couldn't join me, but Justin makes for an entertaining guest as we discuss the ins and outs of charioteers and gladiatorial combat under the rule of the Emperor Vespasian. Links are in the show notes and it's out on the 19th of July on Prime. Sticking with the ancient world, on Saturday I speak with hugely distinguished historian Oswin Murray on the ancient Greeks, and there's plenty more great history to come, including the anniversary of the July plot to kill Hitler, as I have a two-part special. Part 1 is with Roger Morehouse, who discusses those plots that came close to success, including Stauffenberg's. Then Part 2 is our film club episode on Valkyrie, the Tom Cruise movie, and Roger stays with us and joins Tim and I to discuss that. Anyway, back to ancient Rome. I'm going to hand you over to me, talking with Justin Pollard on Those About to Die. Justin, welcome to the pod. It's fantastic to have you on to talk about this, well, I guess epic new TV show is the right way of describing it, would you say?
Absolutely. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me on.
A pleasure, a pleasure. And so for the benefit of listeners, we often, and for yourself as well, Justin, we often have little sort of, bonus episodes, which this will be, on a new TV show that's coming out. And I watched the first episode and I actually didn't realize that the book that this is based on, and you'll be able to help out here, the book that this is based on is Mannix's book, Those About to Die, all about gladiators. So that's the source material, is that right?
No, really. Mannix's book is hugely influential, particularly in the States. It was the basis for Ridley Scott's Gladiator. But it's an odd thing. It tends to be, people say, oh, that's the basis for the book. To begin with, this is a series that is mainly about chariot racing, not about gladiatorial combat. Although, as you know, in the Circus Maximus, you would often have events where you had gladiatorial combat along with the chariot racing. The thing about Daniel Mannix was a really odd character. He was a circus showman, rather than just be. He was not a classical historian and an author. What he does is it's actually more about the present day than the past. He's one of the first authors, popular authors, who writes about the Roman games as though you were reading a match report on Monday morning after the big game of the weekend. What he gets is the connection between the origins of our, mega sports fixtures and the sporting fixtures in ancient Rome. So he talks about it in a way that's very accessible to a modern audience. I think that's what's affected particularly movie directors and TV directors. All of a sudden you get it, oh yeah, and I can see now why we do this, why we've got that. What I wouldn't do is recommend reading Mannix if you want an academic history of ancient Rome, because he's lively in his descriptions, and
he's writing in 1958, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is not an academic text on which you would base anything at all. Strangely, the reason it's important is that it's one of the first ways in which you get someone giving you a way into this ancient world that is immediately grabbable by a large modern audience, by a TV audience, by a movie audience.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant though, but because obviously, Gladiator the movie
Mhm.
was hugely influential in bringing people to the subject of ancient Rome. But then I don't want to linger too long on Maddox, but does that mean that he's slightly looked down upon by classical historians?
By classical historians, absolutely. Yeah. He's absolutely not considered to be one of them, and he's not one of them. And to be fair, he never would have said that he's one of them. When it comes to when you want to make a movie or a TV show about ancient Rome, well, to begin with, you wouldn't start with a book written in the 1950s. It certainly wouldn't be a novel, and it certainly wouldn't be a novel written by a circus showman. But bizarrely, it is that provides the amazing hook that I think made Gladiators so popular and will get our audience into those about to die.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're going to get a sequel to Gladiator soon as well. So you're I was reading the credits because I've watched the first episode, Justin, and you're the dialogue consultant.
Mm-hmm.
So what did that entail?
It's I do also, I do historical consultancy sort of across the board on sort of film and television, and it varies between literally coming in and writing the storyline and the treatment and the Bible to get the commission, through to being on set and just making sure directors and actors are happy with what they're doing. This was a nice one actually, because the script's already in a pretty good shape. A lot of them have been written by Bob Rodat, who's a very famous, brilliant American screenwriter. And the job was not to rewrite the scripts or even really edit scripts, but to increase the Romanization of the feeling of it, to increase the sense of authenticity. It looks authentic because the art department's done an amazing job, and it looks like late first century Rome. What you need then is to get that into the dialogue and the behaviors and what people are doing and how they're talking. So, and obviously you don't, I didn't translate it all into Latin. That would be madness. It's in English. But so you go through and sort of smooth over words that are particularly anachronistic. Not because in many ways, it being in English, that would be any worse than any other word, but because you don't want anything that takes the audience out of the moment. You don't want the audience to stop and think, what? Wait. You go through, and you also go and add in all the little details. So obviously, the Roman pantheon of gods, and we have scenes, in the Temple of Saturn, where the treasury is, and there's a sense of this great, state religion. But what I try to then put in is the little details, so that when people go home at night, the gods who they're praying to or looking to or asking favors of are not the mighty Olympian pantheon, but they're Lares, the gods of their home. So trying to personalize it and give that sense of their own personal beliefs and their own personal lives as well. So a lot of this, as you know, is set in Suburra, a part of Rome we don't often see in movies. Normally, or traditionally, in Roman movies, you get very much the view from the Palatine Hill and the royal box at the games. Everything's quite marbly. Most of this is that we do have, obviously, because we have Anthony Hopkins as Vespasian, who's amazing. But most of this is set actually in the world of bread and circuses. The ordinary Roman citizens who receive this, this wheat dole, the annona, and are provided with these games, what a juvenile calls bread and circuses, to keep them happy. And they're living in a world that would be very familiar in poor parts of the world, all over the world today, of blocks of flats, insulae, that are very badly built, often catch fire. They don't have much in the way of facilities. Generally, if you want to eat, you have to go out to a little papina, one of these little street kitchens, eating junk food, really. And there are a lot of modern parallels. So you try going through the script to put in all of these little details. So rather than just someone having dinner or something, but where are they doing it? How are they doing it? What are the ways they're doing it? And when people are living in their little insulae, how do they talk about them? And we have writers like Marshall, who's living around this time. In his epigrams, it's brilliant because he complains about just these things. He says, I've got a little flat and I've got to climb up 3 flights of stairs to get there. And then the bleeding window doesn't even shut, which is, it's those sorts of brilliant details. Not the sweeping history of Suetonius. That's all sort of done in the overall scripting. It's but what you get out of Juvenal and Marshall, and what you do going through the script is try and put that in.
Yeah, I think particularly the first episode where you get the bread riots, which constantly reading in histories of Rome, rioting happening all the time because no one's got enough food.
That's it, and it goes, and it goes with the circuses as well, of course, because you've got this large mob who you're keeping happy by entertaining them and feeding them. And if one of those two things goes wrong, you're living on a knife edge. Those people up on the Palatine are, running the gauntlet. If for some reason the owner doesn't appear, if ships are held up in Egypt, Egypt's generally the breadbasket at this time, and producing a lot of the grain. If there aren't games to entertain them, or if they think people are cheating at the games, or they don't like what they see at the games, they riot. Famous, there's plenty of rioting after chariot racing and after gladiatorial combat. You've got a big, wound up group of people who you've created yourself. You've made these, the teams for them to support. You give them the food to eat. But if they're not happy, they turn into sort of like a rebellious army who are up against you. So it is an absolute tightrope trying to run a nation based on keeping your population distracted.
Yes, because Rome was the biggest city in the world at the time.
It's going to be around, in greater rate, it's going to be around 1 million people. So by it's a mega city of its day by anyone's standard. Absolutely.
And so we're at you've mentioned Vespasian, so it's the beginning of the Flavian dynasty and the end of that tumultuous year. The opening credits, there's just blood everywhere, which immediately, has me interested. But I'm not sure if the first episode, how far it goes in time, but the year of the four emperors, Vespasian being the fourth of those four emperors.
That's and again, that's the idea was to. Partly that's useful to us because, of course, you get the building of the Flavian Amphitheatre this time. So we're entering in this great era of the public games. But also, it gives us a chance to look at some different emperors. We tend to concentrate on the Julio-Claudians, partly because of Suetonius, and they're great value. You go from Julius Caesar, who basically creates a monarchy out of a republic. You have characters we think of as quite cuddly, like Claudius, although he wasn't particularly cuddly. And then you've got Gaius Caligula and Nero. What's not to love? The stories are so salacious, but of course it collapses, and then you get the year of the four emperors, where basically you have a series of military coups where four military leaders all attempt to take control of the empire, ending up with certainly the best qualified and probably the best general amongst them, Vespasian, who, of course, when he was a younger man, was the legate in charge of the Second Augustan Legion in the conquest of Britain, and had been in Judea during the Judean Wars, which his son Titus was mopping up. So they take over, and you get this extraordinary situation where all of a sudden you've got basically a middle-class monarchy, because the Flavians were originally in the equestrian class. They're not from the great old senatorial families. So they've got to please the old senatorial families, which largely they're doing through military control of the empire, and a mob who are thoroughly sick of the Julio-Claudian. One of the first things that, as you know, that Vespasian does is give back the land that Nero stole to build his golden house, which was a large but serious chunk of Rome, which he basically privatized for himself, and builds this huge statue, the Colossus, in it. And Vespasian gives that back to the people and builds them this stadium, largely the proceeds from the Jewish wars. And that's why we call that stadium the Colosseum, because it's where the Colossus, built by Nero, used to stand. So you've got a new type of emperor, and it works. Titus is the first biological son, I think, to inherit the empire from his father, isn't he? There's none before who managed to do that. But the way they do it requires them to keep everyone happy all the time. And that is both their genius and ultimately maybe their downfall. I can't give spoilers, obviously. But we start in that period. So the year of the four emperors happened. People were sickened by the bloodshed and the uncertainty of the year of the four emperors. They were tired of the Julio-Claudians, and the Flavians offered a break with the past and a new start, although not a return to the Republic, which many people actually wanted. And we come into the series with Vespasian established, but coming towards the end of his reign.
It's quite fun watching Vespasian and his two sons in the Circus Maximus, watching these chariot races. I mean, how invested were they really in particular teams of chariots?
It appears to be very much the case. I mean, there's this idea amongst the aristocracy that the games, and particularly chariot racing, is a bit beneath them. It's not, gambling is a bit crude and it's not something we do. But that's not how they behave. They gamble extensively on. There are the four factions in the Circus Maximus, and almost all of Rome can divide itself into one of those factions. It is very similar to, you can go around the world today and find supporters of Manchester United or Real Madrid, or almost everyone belongs to it. And in belonging to a faction, you get that sense of belonging. You get that wonderful team spirit. You get the excitement of going to the games, like watching an England match, which is always a very stressful event in football. So they are invested right the way through. And of course, it's a big money game as well. Chariot racing is probably the most lucrative sport of all time. I may be going out on a limb there saying that. But if we take someone like Gaius Diocles, who was a charioteer just after our time, he makes about 24 million sesterces during a 24-year career. So that would make him, we don't know exactly how much of it he kept. He survived, he wasn't killed. I looked up, I think Michael Jordan is the richest sportsman alive today, who, mainly because of his sportswear and stuff that he now has. And I think he's worth, I wrote it down somewhere, worth something like $3.75 billion. If Diocles was alive today, and allowing for it being quite difficult to translate between sesterces and dollars, but roughly it would be worth about $15 billion. So it is a mega sport. It is the first mega sport, making mega stars. A lot of these drivers start out as slaves, or certainly they're very lowly members of society, and they become their names are carved in graffiti at Pompeii. I love Scorpus. Go Diocles. It's absolutely brilliant. And with all of that, with all of the money, of course, comes all the problems you get with modern professional sport, all the corruption. So you get horses being doped, you get drivers being bribed, you get chariots being rigged, you get all sorts of betting crime going on. And of course, this goes right to the top of society because, the more money changing hands, the more interested the aristocracy are.
It's funny because I can't help but contrast that to the Olympic Games of the 5th century BC, where you have these wealthy Athenian aristocrats who win the Olympic Games simply because they own a chariot. But that always comes across as a little bit more, they're a little bit more aloof from the muck of the reality of the races that you get in ancient Rome.
Oh, I think there is a huge, Nero would have agreed with this. There is a huge difference between the arena and the Olympic arena. This is why Nero famously goes on tour as an Olympic champion through Greece with his poetry, which he let the Greek people enjoy so, repeatedly. So these are the Roman games are more visceral. They're about a different thing. They're not a competition between states or individuals or other. They are the mechanism by which the city of Rome is controlled. They are, Juvenal in Satires 10 famously, he says, bread and circus.
Right. Well, one area that is also dealt with in the show, which it was such an important part of the economy, is slavery.
Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated by ancient slavery. And, do we know, if the population of Rome was 1 million, how many, do we know roughly how many slaves there would have been?
Very good question. I've never come across an estimate which has some maths behind it. But you're right, the slavery is not just an element of the Roman Empire. It is the engine of the Roman Empire. It is for an individual to be richer than another individual requires one individual to have less than the other one. And that is how the Roman Empire works. And it's fascinating because you look at all the technology in the Roman Empire, and people often ask, why didn't the Romans have an industrial revolution? We know someone like Heron in Alexandria creates the aeropile, which is like a sort of primitive steam engine. We have people who build automata in the Roman world. Why didn't they make labor-saving devices? And the whole point is they didn't do it because they didn't need to, because their society is based on slavery. Simply on saying, if they had labor-saving devices, what are they going to do with all these slaves? They are holding large populations, often originally from outside the empire, or from the bottom strata of the empire, at knife point, holding life or death over them. The last thing they need is for them to have nothing to do. The whole point is to keep them absolutely running the empire, to keep the empire going. So slavery isn't just an adjunct, isn't just it's not like having servants in Downton Abbey. These are not servants, these are slaves, and the whole of Roman society is predicated around that. The Roman civilization works on slavery.
And so would you genuinely then, if offered the choice, which you wouldn't be, but if you were offered the choice between the tin, I think it's a tin mine in Crete they talk about,
Yep.
or have a crack against the lion in the Colosseum, you would. I mean, it doesn't seem to be much of a choice, but it seems as though the Colosseum is the more attractive of the two.
It is. Well, whilst we said slavery is the driver of the empire, there are many types of slave. I think at the very bottom, the worst life of all is in the mines and on the galleys, rowing. And these are places where you are simply a machine that will be worked to death. They are effectively death camps, really. You'll be worked until you can't work anymore. So possibly a step up is, ending up in the ludus, training to be a gladiator. You have a chance, and there are, plenty of cases, in Suetonius and elsewhere, where gladiators become so popular with the crowd and are successful and are freed, so actually survive. I think if you're ending up with a wild animal, you are effectively dead. I mean, that tends to be a form of execution rather than a game. It is a spectacle, but no one could really argue. I'm struggling to think of any cases where the lions lose. There are cases where the lions were very reluctant because they, naturally most wild animals don't generally attack humans, so they did have to be largely encouraged. But I think there is an opportunity in the gladiator ring and in the Circus Maximus. Quite a lot of charioteers start out as slaves, and they can buy their freedom. So there are ways out of freedom. There are ways out of slavery. If by chance, by what you do or who you know, you get enough money together, you can buy your way out of slavery. If you're a house slave, that's much more like being a servant. And famously, people like Claudius employed as their most senior advisors freedmen, people who had been slaves. So it was quite often amongst aristocratic households, on the death of the head of the household, a number of their senior slaves would be freed under the terms of the will. So there is slavery, and slavery. If I could choose, I would absolutely be an imperial house slave, and I would absolutely not be down the mines or in the galleys. But at least in the arena or in the Circus Maximus, I have a tiny chance, not only of escaping death, but possibly of becoming one of the richest people of all time.
That's a nice thought. Nice thought. Just going back to the circus, because it's vast in the show.
Yeah.
It looks huge.
Well, have you been to Circus Maximus in Rome? You can still.
I have.
It is the most extraordinary site, and of course, these are the type sites which have their origins in ancient Greece, but for modern stadia. And you see it even if you walk through Rome. If you go to the Piazza Navona, whilst you can't see anything now of the stadium that was there, the whole shape of the piazza is still the shape of the racetrack that you're in. For their day, they are venues on a scale of Wembley, of any of the great modern stadia, all of which, both in name and shape and form, are based on these Roman prototypes.
It is extraordinary, and they were all over the empire, weren't they? I mean, you get these small little amphitheatres in towns in Switzerland.
You do. There's one in Caerleon, although in Britain, which to a Roman living in Rome is a very long way away, it is a form of entertainment. I expect, particularly if you're right out in Britain, these theatres double up for many different events. Most of them are too small to do a chariot racing. You could certainly do gladiatorial combat, but I expect quite a lot of theatre and just general, public announcements and public life was undertaken within them. For chariot racing, you do need a lot of space because they go very fast, and the whole point of it is to run these machines and these people to the very edge. And so it's very dangerous. You get lots of deaths. It's normal for a charioteer to die. And when they crash, the whole crowd shouts "shipwreck," which is the Roman term for this car crash, which seems ghoulish to us, perhaps. But if you look back, I did some development on a show about sports car racing in the 1950s, a very different world. But Le Mans in 1955, where there was tragedy in a car ploughed into the crowd, the engine came off and killed tens and tens of people. Motorsport in the 50s and 60s, the death toll is appalling, but it is considered part of the sport. And the racing drivers are considered the more heroic for being prepared to take that risk. So it's not as strange and alien, perhaps, as we might now, 30, 40 years later, like to think.
I think you mentioned you were on set. Did you?
I didn't get on set. No, I spent time in Rome, but I couldn't get on set this one for family reasons.
But Mr. Hopkins is there, and of course he plays. So he's playing Vespasian in this show, and he's played Titus Andronicus in the filmed version of Shakespeare. It's quite funny watching him play someone who played his son many years ago in that particularly brutal production of Titus Andronicus. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a lot of blood.
Titus Andronicus is not a happy play, is it, by any standards? It's a bloodbath, but it is. It must be very strange as an actor of that caliber who've played all of these characters at different points in different careers. And when I started work on this, first thing I did was rewatch I, Claudius, partly just to get a sense of the late Julio Claudians, so we're going into the Flavians. But also, you look at that, and every famous actor for 2 generations was in that. There is an appeal of the Roman world. I think possibly that comes from, a lot of our greatest actors have a background in Shakespeare. And Shakespeare provides us with a number of Roman plays. And even the guards on the door in I, Claudius are now internationally famous actors. So I think there's definitely a path through from classical acting, from Shakespearean acting into it. And to see then, Anthony Hopkins play Vespasian is, so like you, I had to watch it in rushes rather than on set. But it's an extraordinary performance. He's not playing a young and healthy Vespasian. He's playing Vespasian who is starting to think about, how do I what's my legacy and how do I hand it on? And that is something that any great man or woman thinks about towards the end of their life, I'm sure. But all Vespasian has to look back on, of course, is the whole of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, none of whom managed to successfully hand on their throne to their biological children, followed by a year of civil war. And he has these 2 sons, and you see a man working out what his legacy is going to be and seeing how much he will be able to control it. And with, of course, that terrible knowledge that all great men and women have, is that once they do die, there's nothing they can do.
Well, Justin, that's rather a good way to end our conversation, I think. Thanks very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Anytime.
Thanks very much for listening. Remember, the ancient Greeks are coming up on Saturday, and plenty more great history to come, so please do subscribe or follow, and if you can give me a kind rating, I'd be very grateful. But until then, thank you, and good night.